We're up to the fourth principle of the Torah. I'll read you what he says. I'll explain what he says, and then I'll explain the difficulty that I have. So I realize I may have to clarify it and come back and fill it in tomorrow. The fourth is kadmus. Now, the word kadmus comes from kodem, and kodem means before. So it means something like the Creator is before. And he explains, this one, after all, this one source of all being, that was the first one is the existence of Creator, and the second one was his singularity. He's the absolute before. Everything other than he is not before with respect to him. It might be before other things, but it's not before with respect to him. And the proofs for this in the various literature are many. And this principle is what the verse in Deuteronomy says, Ma'ono Elokei Kedem. The heavens are the position, so to speak, of the God of before. And he says this is a great principle of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, that the world is new. Meaning, as against Aristotle, who says the world is infinitely old, the world is not infinitely old. It's new. It came into existence. And therefore has a finite age. Kodesh Baruch Hu formed it and created it after absolute nothingness. And he says, I'm now describing to you the idea of his being before according to the position of the philosophers. I'm doing this in order to... I think they made a mistake in their reference here. That's what was setting me off. I have to explain that. In order to make the proof of his existence absolute, as I've explained in the Gemara. Okay, there's a bunch of things going on here. There's a gigantic mistake made by many people who read the Rambam, who think that he is really a believer in Aristotle, a follower of Aristotle. That's definitely not the case. In fact, he rejects Aristotle over and over again. In the beginning of the second part of the guide, he says, I'm going to give you a proof, according to the philosophers, of the existence of one who's in charge of the world. I'm using words that are very vague and very ambiguous because I don't want to pin it down at the moment. One who's in charge of the world. And he says, I'm going to use 26 premises. 25, I myself can verify are true. They are taken from other ancient books, a lot from Aristotle, but I don't trust Aristotle, says the Rambam. I don't trust him for anything. And if I take a principle from him, it's only because I've verified it myself. He thought of it, so I'm taking it from his book, but not because I think he has any authority. The 26th principle that Aristotle uses is the eternity of the world. It has no beginning. I'll use that one also, even though it's false. We reject it. It's not true. We don't believe it. But I'll use it anyway. Now, why would he use it if he doesn't believe it's true. So the Rambam explains this at least twice in the Gemara. Here is his methodology. The Arabs, the Muslim philosophers, went about it a different way. The world has a beginning. And since the world has a beginning, there must be a beginner that made it have a beginning. And that beginner, who began the whole world, must be the creator. End of proof. The Rambam says they have no good reason to believe on its own that the world has a beginning. They did not succeed in arguing convincingly that the world has a beginning. So the onlooker will say, you started off that the world has a beginning. You got that because you believe it is a part of your religion, and you made some hand waves just to try to argue for it, but they weren't satisfactory. Yeah, you're right. If you start with the idea that the world has a beginning, you can get a creator from that. But you didn't convincingly show us that the world has a beginning. But Rambam says, I'm going to do it mimanoshach. If the world has a beginning, then of course there's something that's responsible for it. That would be the creator. But even if the world doesn't have a beginning, it has a being that's in charge and runs it and makes it work, and one who's worthy of mastery and obedience and worship. And therefore, I'll get to the conclusion that I want, that there is a being who's in charge of the world. Either way, it's mimanoshach. Whether the world is infinitely old or isn't infinitely old. Either way. That's the strength of the Rambam's argument. Of course, the conclusions aren't exactly the same, because if the world is infinitely old, then there's no creator. But you get a manhig, something that's running the world, something that's in charge of the world, something that has power over the world. That you do get. And that's why the Rambam uses the two-pronged argument. So he's talking now about kadmus, and he says, I'm using the language of the philosophers. I told you by the way, I've mentioned this before, but here it is, where in the commentary on the Mishnah, which was his first major work, he makes reference to what he wrote in his last major work, which is the Moreh Nevuchim. And that's because he changed the commentary of the Mishnah his whole lifetime. He kept revising it his whole lifetime. These words that he inserted here into this fourth principle were not in the original edition, and they were in the final edition. So, you'll ask me, well, why does the Rambam believe that the world is new, it is only finite age, if he's going to make an argument on both sides, one way or the other? And the answer is this. This is what I'm telling you now is part 2, chapter 25, which has been misinterpreted and misapplied over and over again by people who call themselves scholars. The Rambam says that when you are interpreting the Torah, there are certain principles that are used to decide how to interpret the Torah. Not everything in the Torah is literal. Even the Talmudic sages identified phrases in the Torah that are not literal. How do you decide whether a phrase is literal or not literal? Well, one thing is to ask yourself, what kind of objection do you have against taking it literally? Is it perhaps that this passage in the Torah contradicts another passage in the Torah? And then you can't take them both literally, so something's got to give? That's a good reason for thinking of another interpretation. Is it that what the Torah says is absolutely absurd if taken literally? That's also a good reason. For example, I think Rosh Hashanah uses this example. It says that Adam called the name of his wife Chava, ki hi haiso aim kol chai. He called her Chava, which in Hebrew is the word for life, because she was the mother of all life. Really? The mother of all life, including squirrels? Don't be stupid. I didn't mean squirrels. Of course not. I wasn't talking about squirrels. I'm talking about people. Really? The mother of all people? Autumn's mother also? Her own mother? Don't be stupid. Of course, Adam and Chava were created together. Of course, she wasn't his mother. And if no one could be her own mother, I meant the mother of all the other ones. That's right. That's what it means. Doesn't mean what a 6-year-old would find with a dictionary. Mother, all life, everything that's alive, squirrels and her own mother and Anna's mother also. No, it doesn't mean that. Because the objection is obvious. Well, asks the Rambam, what would happen if the verses that seem to say the world has a beginning, you had a good objection against them, a really good objection, solid objection, a strong philosophical proof that the world has no beginning? Then we would reinterpret them. We would reinterpret them for 2 reasons. Because, number one, didn't we reinterpret all the ones that say that God is physical? All of them? Hundreds of them? Literally, they say God is physical, and we say, not really, not really. Because we have a very good reason to think he isn't physical. If you had a very good reason to think the world was infinitely old, then we would have reinterpreted the verses that say that the world has a beginning. Has a beginning. We would reinterpret them. Reinterpreting is available when the obstacle to taking them literally is very strong. And furthermore, and this is part of it, the idea that the world has no beginning wouldn't violate any of the principles of our Torah. If you took it the way Plato says it, it wouldn't violate any principles of our Torah, because nature is not absolute for Plato, and miracles are all possible for Plato, and we would accept it that way. If you had a proof that the world was infinitely old like Aristotle, everything would be over. He says at the end of the parak, we'd go on to other things, we'd have to revise our whole belief system. But, he says, there is no proof for Aristotle's picture. Not only that, but he goes at length interpreting Aristotle, pointing out that Aristotle himself didn't think he had a proof because of the way he argues. He argues back and forth, and he says, and if you'll say this, then I'll say that, and my opinion is better than their opinion because it's more fundamental, and so forth and so on. He says, when you prove something, you don't argue with other people, and you don't bring their opinions, and you don't say how you would answer them. You present a proof, and that settles it. Ever hear about anything in mathematics that says, yeah, but if you said it was this way, then I would answer you this way. You present the proof, and it's over. It's done. So Aristotle himself knew there wasn't a proof. So what do we have here? We have a question. Does the world have a beginning or doesn't it? And there's no proof either way. The Arabic philosophers have not succeeded in showing that there is a beginning, and Aristotle has not succeeded in showing that there's no beginning. So that means in terms of logical argumentation, it's open. It could be one way or the other way. Well, when it's open, then I have no adequate reason to reinterpret the verses. So the Torah tells me that it has a beginning. And that's why I believe it has a beginning. Because the Torah says so. And you need strong reason to reinterpret the Torah. And there's no strong reason to reinterpret it. So the Rambam is committed 100% life and death. The world has a beginning. Because the Torah says so. Is that a surprise that the Rambam is informed by the Torah what to believe? If it's a surprise, you think that Rambam's a prisoner of logic and so forth and so on, is Aristotelian. Since there's nothing in logic that convinces me one way or the other, therefore the Sukkim determine the truth for me. And if there were a proof for Aristotle, it would be all over. I wouldn't reinterpret the Torah. The Torah cannot be reinterpreted in that respect. So that's why he's saying what he's saying. Right. So the fourth principle is that the world has a beginning. Now, are we together so far? I mean, I covered a fair amount of material. All right. So now, what disturbs me about the way he puts it is that he says that it means that the world came into existence after there being absolutely nothing. Now notice, first of all, I think I mentioned this a couple of days ago, but notice, first of all, he doesn't say the world is made from nothing. Even though in Hebrew, we say yesh me'ayin, it sounds like that. It sounds like the world's made from nothing. I told you the joke about nobody coming to the party, right? I said, so somebody says, yeah, you threw a party. How was it? Was it well attended? And he says, nobody came. And the other guy says, yeah? Did he have a good time? How much did he eat? When did he leave? I'm afraid you don't understand me. Nobody came doesn't mean there's a fellow whose name is nobody on his sweatshirt, and he walked in and had some food and drink and left. Nobody means no one was there. The room was empty. So when you say yesh me'ayin, it was made out of nothing, Nothing isn't the name of a stuff out of which it was made. It was made from nothing means it wasn't made from anything. There wasn't anything for it to be made from. There was, where the Rambam puts it here, there was nothing at all, other than Kodesh Baruch Hu, obviously, other than God. And then there was something which started that at that point. Absolute start with nothing before it. Now, that's Kadmus. He was there in this picture before there was anything. He's the absolute before. Nothing else existed. And then he brought things into existence. Now, the way I just said it literally is difficult. Even though that's the translation of the Arabic here, and this paragraph he put in at the end of his life. I'll tell you why it's difficult. Because the Rambam in the Mora describes that time is a difficult concept. People have become confused about it, and there's been some unnecessary controversy about it. Because if you try to locate time in what place it has in the world, it's a subtle matter because it is a quality of a quality. It means as follows. You have in the world physical objects, and then you have qualities of physical objects like brown or square or hard or metallic or balanced. Those are qualities of physical objects. One quality of physical object is motion. Some are in motion, some aren't in motion. Some are in motion with respect to one another. Maybe motion is relative, so you have to tie it to something else that's moving with respect to. Now, time is regular motion. Not all motion is regular. Some motion is irregular. So time is the regularity of the motion. So it's a quality of a quality. But it's the regularity of the motion of physical objects. That's what time is. So the Rambam here is quoting an idea which fits very well with one of the revolutions of Einstein. We think that clocks measure time. Einstein said, time is what clocks do. That's what time is. Time isn't something else, and the clock is measuring to something else, as if to say, and if there were no clocks, there'd be time anyhow, just nothing to measure it with. No, time is what clocks do. So, that being the case, there can't be time without a physical universe. If time is the regular motion of physical objects, if there aren't any physical objects, there is no time. That means that time is part of the created universe. Time in this respect is no different in principle from matter, energy, size, shape, color. All of those are features of the created universe, physical universe. And time comes in Time exists in the motion of the objects in the physical universe. Now, if that's true, then speaking about before the creation is literally meaningless. Before the creation is literally meaningless. Because before means earlier in time. So if you imagine, here's the beginning of the physical universe, and it goes from here this way. So time occurs inside. Inside, you can talk about which was earlier, the baseball game or the football game. Okay, baseball game is here, the football game is there, baseball game is earlier. But if you ask what happened before the creation, that would mean relating something here to something on the other side of the wall. But there is no time on this side of the wall, because on this side of the wall there's nothing physical to move. Time exists only on this side of the wall. So before the creation literally makes no sense. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that we started this saying that our Rambam says even if you follow Aristotle, saying that there is no creation, still this makes sense. How can there? How I wanted to ask, how can there be?
I didn't say this makes sense. I didn't say these principles. I said there is a being who is running the world and has the power to make it do what it does, and is worthy of serving, so to speak. I didn't say that these principles. I said we wouldn't be a creator, so he's not going to follow these principles.
You can ask what leads us to think that there would still be which factor or principles lead us to think that there's still
some being like that. So it's it's got like 25 chapters on it, so it's not something I can summarize usefully. But it is similar to what I said before about the spheres turning around, right? The spheres are capable of their own motion, and they turn around because of an idea that they have. That idea is what determines the motion that they spontaneously do. And that idea is embodied in a malach, we said, in an angel, right? And they grasp that principle of the angel. So this is like a super being of that type, where everything else gravitates towards it because of the kinds of things that they are, and it contains that principle that they gravitate towards. Okay, so now, it's a good thing, by the way, that time is a created feature of the world, because questions about what happened before the creation were raised, but not by our people, but by others, and they do create some difficulties. Once you know that time exists only inside the creation, not outside, so then these questions disappear. For example, one of the questions that the medievals asked was this: before the creation, there was nothing there but the Creator. So every instant was identical to every other instant. Nothing changed. There was nothing there to change. There was nothing there to exist, to be the same or different. Everything was identical. How then did God choose which instant to create the world if they're all exactly the same? Don't tell me he did something arbitrary. We don't associate arbitrariness with the Creator. Everything should have a reason. Everything should be reasonable, rational. How did he choose which instant of all the identical instants to create the universe? The answer to that is simple. There weren't any instants because there was no time. Time is internal to the creation. I mentioned this before when we taught. I mentioned there's a Gemara in Pesachim that says 7 things were created before the creation of the world. And I said, literally before the creation of the world makes no sense. And what it means is that the world stands on them. Without them, the world couldn't continue. They're the pillars on which the existence of the world is standing. So here, the idea of kadmus can be understood without putting it in terms of before and after, as which is similar to what he said in the first principle, and that is that his existence doesn't depend upon anything else. Everything flows from him. Nothing causes him, affects him, changes him, assists him. Everything flows from him. He's the source of everything. And that means that it's like something which exists before something else. The thing that exists before can't be dependent on the thing that comes afterwards, because it existed without its existing. So here, the idea of time communicates the idea of independence. But it's not a question of time. It's like someone would say in mathematics: first come the axioms, and after that come the arguments and the theorems. Not first in time. You may learn them that way, and you may learn the subject that way, but axioms aren't any stronger or truer than the theorems. They're all on the same level. Just you come to know them by arguing it through. It's not because one is earlier than the other. So the same thing's true here. Now, why the Rambam writes that it was created after the absolute absolute absence of everything, as if to say there's a state of being called emptiness, and then 16 hours later, then he created the world. There's nothing there to be the 16 hours. There's nothing there to constitute the 16 hours. So I can only say that he's using this language, he's writing this, after all, the commentary in the Mishnah was written for relatively uneducated people. And to make the point that I'm making now would be quite difficult and to a certain extent confusing. And perhaps he didn't choose to make it. He used this language because it would be the way to say that the world has an absolute beginning. But I'm just pointing out that, literally speaking, to say that it comes after a period of absolute absence is not strictly speaking correct, not according to his own principles. Now, in part 2, chapter 17 of the guide, he replies to one of the types of reasoning that Aristotelians used, and to explain to them what kind of mistake they're making. Now, you have to understand, if in the Rambam's time, let's see, we're 5,800, so it's about 900 years ago, 4,900. The world's age, according to his time, was about 4,900, and Aristotle said the age of the universe is infinite. That's a pretty big disparity. Yep, it's an infinitely big disparity. 13.8 billion years is nothing compared to infinity. And he has an argument how to explain the mistake that they're making and why they cannot rule out our position. And he gives a parable. He says, imagine a boy who's born, and several months after birth his mother dies, and the father takes him to a colony of men, where there are only men. Child grows up, and he asks the adults in the colony, where do we come from? How did we come into the world? So they say, well, there are others who are like us in many respects, but different in a few. And we all start out as tiny miniatures inside the body of one of them. And we're there for months and months. And then we come out of the bodies and we grow to see the way you see us now, the way we are now. So the child asks, inside the body of one of those? Tell me something. When we're in the body of the other one, can we breathe? And the answer is no, can't breathe. Can we eat? No. Can we drink? No. So the child says, well, sorry guys, that's just not acceptable. Imagine you would take a very tiny bird and swallow it. Would it live? How long would it live? Inside your stomach. 2 minutes? 5 minutes? You're telling me that we were inside the bodies of these others and we didn't breathe for months? What kind of story are you telling me? That's ridiculous. Didn't eat for months, didn't drink for months? How can I believe something like that? What is the child doing? The child is taking the world that he sees, the world of men, and what he knows about life and death in that world, and he's measuring the story against what he sees in his world. And given what he sees in his world, he's certainly right. Living, a living animal of any size that can't breathe, can't eat, and can't drink for months is going to be dead. What do we say? Well, pregnancy, gestation, is a condition of existence which operates under principles utterly different from what you know. You have no clue that there is another condition of life possible. So given what you see, if that's the world, you're right. What we're telling you is impossible. But that isn't the whole world. Now, the Rambam says, Aristotle, who thinks the world has no beginning, is because he's looking at the world that he sees, which is the world after the 6 days of creation. The 6 days of creation were the process by which things were brought into being, including the laws of nature, so-called, whatever the laws of nature are. It's a long subject, but they also were coming into existence. During the 6 days, not everything in what we have in the laws of nature was followed. It didn't govern what was going on. Now you're standing, Aristotle, are standing in a world after the whole gestation process is finished, after the birth has taken place. You're just like that boy who grew up in his colony of men and was asking, where do we come from? And he's basing the answer on what he sees. You too are basing the answer on what you see. What you don't know is that the world had its own period of gestation when it was coming into existence, and under those conditions, things were very different. So you say that motion is conserved. Motion comes from motion, which comes from motion. Motion doesn't disappear. Motion doesn't go away. So if things are moving, it must be there things before we're moving. And those before we're moving, then even before that they were moving. Every chicken comes from an egg, and every egg comes from a chicken. So eggs and chickens have to go all the way back. What you're saying is natural. It's natural. And it's reasonable insofar as you're describing the world you see. But the world you see isn't the whole story. There are the 6 days, which you don't know anything about, because you don't see that. So that argument can be used to reply to someone who thinks the world has no beginning at all. And it can also be used to reply to someone who thinks the beginning of the world is 13.8 billion years ago. On what grounds? On the grounds that the way I see the world operating now is how it always has operated. Aha. Now you begin to hear there's an assumption there. What I see in the world is all there is. There isn't anything else. Really? What makes you so sure of that? Why are you convinced of that? How did you rule out the possibility of anything else? Really? So if you realize that a free assumption is being made here, then you say, okay, you made an assumption and you drew your conclusions. It's a free world. You can do as you like, but don't expect me to roll over and play dead because of your assumptions. Especially since, as I have told you on previous occasions, we talked about steady state theory. And they discovered in the 1920s the world is expanding, the universe is expanding, and they didn't want there to be a beginning. So they cooked up this idea called steady state theory. Yeah, you can Google it. It's right there on Wikipedia. And the idea was that the world has infinitely big and things are moving apart and new stuff is coming into existence out of nothing all the time throughout the universe. New stuff coming into existence all the time. Wow, that's what you believe? You're the scientist and you believe in, well, we won't call it creation because then you'd have to have a creator, right? Just the universe spontaneously makes more stuff out of nothing. Out of nothing, really? Yeah, well, you see, kind of stuck because things are moving apart and the universe doesn't get infinitely thin. There's stuff that you can see and you have neighbors, so it's got to be coming from somewhere, so it's got to be coming in from nowhere and being made out of nothing. Oh, well, you could buy that. Like that. You could buy it because you need it. No. 50 years ago, now 100 years ago, if someone had told you stuff is coming into the universe out of nowhere, you wouldn't have bought it, would you? No, because we don't see it. So why did you buy it when you needed it? Because we needed it, like even if we didn't see it, but still, we had to prevent the beginning, so we needed it, so we invented it. Thanks a lot. So how convinced are you that you're right, really? If you can change your mind on something which, in principle, is very revolutionary, without seeing it, nobody saw it, but you can change your mind because you need it, you can't really be very convinced that your picture is correct and complete, can you? So we're telling you that your picture has a hole in it, another hole in it. The hole is the 6 days of creation. If you took that into account, your idea of how old the universe is would be very different. So that's how you use the Rambam's example from 217 to talk to people in contemporary times. Just similarly, Stephen Weinberg in his book, The First 3 Minutes, was great. He won the Nobel Prize, and of course he was an atheist, writes that the cosmological principle which says the world is, the universe is homogeneous and isotropic is something that we assume, and all of our conclusions are based on that assumption. He's honest enough to say we just assume it. Homogeneous means it's roughly equally filled with matter and space. Isotropic means it looks the same from wherever you look. It looks the same wherever you look. How many places did you try? Did you go to Alpha Centauri and try? Did you go to the other galaxies and try? Well, no, I can't get there, sort of. But we just assume that because that's the way you draw your conclusions. You make that assumption, Stephen Hawking, in the Brief History of Time, says we have the principle of what was called Copernican principle, that we're not special. We're not in any special place in the universe. That means that what we see is going to be typical. Everybody else, another way of putting the idea of isotropy, wherever people look elsewhere, will see roughly the same thing that we see. Why do we believe that, he says? Because of humility. Did you think the cosmology was based on humility? That's a fundamental principle of understanding the cosmos is humility? Golly. I know we talk about that in Musar, we talk about that in character development, but I didn't think that would play a role in cosmology. Well, otherwise you can't draw conclusions, because if we're in a special place, then we can't know what the universe is really like in toto, because we're seeing it from a skewed corner. So you have to assume that that's not true. So when you understand that they're making these kinds of assumptions, okay, you become a little more relaxed, and you don't worry that they came to conclusions different from ours, and so on and so on. Okay. They made their assumptions, and they drew their conclusions. So the Rambam here is telling us that the universe has a beginning, and that's an absolute principle of the Torah, because the verses say so. That's why. That for him is enough to establish a fundamental principle of the Jewish religion. Don't tell me he does it because he's a philosopher, because he's an Aristotelian. It's just dead wrong.
What is Aristotelian?
I'm sorry?
What is Aristotelian defined as?
What does
Aristotelian, what is that defined as?
What is that?
Defined as?
Well, Aristotle was a person. So Aristotelian would mean what he believed, what the things that he taught, the principles.
Is there an approach, or no? Is it just believing in his ideas and certain like.
You mean if a person is an Aristotelian? I don't know what you're asking.
Yeah, if a person, if you call someone an Aristotelian, does that just mean he believes in Aristotle? Does it mean it's a certain outlook, a certain academic approach?
No, it would mean he believes in what Aristotle says. But there might be two reasons why he would say that. It's just that when you speak, it's you don't distinguish them carefully, they get confused. One is, listen, I did my own independent research. I saw what Aristotle wrote, and I looked it up myself, and I analyzed myself, did experiments myself, and I agree he got it right. Which would be close to, I think, the way the Rambam looks at it. Another would say Aristotle was such a great philosopher, and he knew so much, and he was so brilliant. When he says it, I accept it because he says it. That's a very different position. That's utterly foreign from the Rambam. Utterly foreign from the Rambam. By the way, since we spoke about this, and I have a couple of minutes left, there's another place where he says that Aristotle's theory is inadequate, and Aristotle knew that it was inadequate. And that is where he described how the stars work, the spheres. Aside from the fact that there are many different systems of spheres, and aside from the fact that some of them physically contradict one another because the spheres are of different sizes and they don't all revolve around the same center, which means that they slice into one another, which isn't physically possible. But more than that, the Rambam says, nature is characterized by order. There's order and reason to the way things relate to one another, like the food chain among living organisms. And in the heavens, there's no order and there's no reason. Some move from east to west, and some move from west to east, and they move at different speeds, and there's no order that the farther ones out move faster and the closer ones in move slower. No, it's irregular in that respect. There's no order to the way in which the spheres are supposed to work. And the Rambam says there are only two possibilities for the nature of the entire universe. One is that it's what we call natural, and natural means ordered, or it's created. And the spheres, as they're described by Aristotle and the others, aren't ordered. And Aristotle knew that. He understood that he had not given a natural explanation of the heavens. He just didn't take the next step and say, well, if it isn't natural, then it's created. But we say, and this is, you have to use the contemporary jargon, this is the opposite. This is an argument of creation from disorder. Not the argument from design, but the argument from lack of design. Because what looks like design could be the necessary forces of nature. But something which looks disordered isn't nature by definition. For him in the ancient world. So he has an argument for creation from disorder. So, but again, he says that Aristotle, his explanation of the heavens does not satisfy you a natural picture, and he says Aristotle knew that he had not succeeded giving a natural picture for the way in which the heavens work. Okay, that's the fourth principle.
Maybe one argument which is purely emotional argument, I don't know, it fits into this discussion, but would it be valid to say that it doesn't make sense how for Hashem was the infinite ultimate, why it would be this amount of time, this limited amount of time, enough for him to fulfill whatever he wants to fulfill. Wouldn't there need more time or something? It's not really a philosophical.
Right.
It's more of an emotional argument.
The Rambam, so far as I know, doesn't use the word infinite at all.
Okay.
It doesn't. The only place where it's used is in an Aristotelian principle that, at one instant in time, you cannot have an infinity of causes. You can have spread out over infinite time, but you can't have one. So in other words, if something's happening and it's being caused now, you can't trace it up to an infinity of causes. It's got to stop somewhere. That's all. But he never says that God is infinite.
Yeah.
I think that once you say that God is beyond understanding, beyond description, if you can't even say God is one, you're not going to say He's infinite either. Right? There's no point in saying it.
So,
So I'm not.